"Sir, if you give me $1 for bread, I'll give you something nobody else can." The tiny voice echoed through Richard Harrington's cavernous mansion, stopping him cold in his wheelchair. The little girl with tangled blonde hair and worn-out shoes stood unafraid, eyes full of impossible wisdom. But neither the paralyzed billionaire nor the desperate child could possibly imagine how a single dollar would change both their lives forever. Before the story begins, wherever you are on your journey, consider this as encouragement to keep going. If this resonates with you, please give us a like and subscribe to our channel for more inspiration. "Get her out! How did a child get past security?" Richard Harrington barked from his wheelchair. The little girl with the tattered pink backpack didn't flinch. "I'm sorry, Mr. Harrington." Margaret, his nurse, apologized. "She just appeared. I'll call security right away." Richard's eyes narrowed at the small intruder. 6 years old, blonde hair in messy pigtails, wearing a dress that had seen better days. Her startlingly blue eyes looked straight at him without fear. "Wait," he said, raising a hand. Something about this child's composure intrigued him. "Who are you, and what are you doing in my house?" "I'm Lily Thompson, sir. I live with my mom in the apartments behind your wall." She pointed toward the window. "There's a hole in your fence where the big tree fell last month." Richard made a mental note to have security check the perimeter. "That doesn't explain why you're here, uninvited," he said, wheeling closer. The movement sent a familiar stab of pain through his useless legs. Lily stood her ground. "I need $1, sir." A startled laugh escaped Richard's throat. $1? You break into a billionaire's home and ask for a single dollar? Why not 1,000? 1,000,000? "Because I only need enough for bread," she replied simply. "Mom's tip money doesn't come until tomorrow, and we're out of food today." Her directness silenced him momentarily. At 58, Richard had built TechVision into a global empire, survived a vicious divorce, and the car accident that severed his spinal cord, but he rarely encountered such unvarnished honesty. "And what do I get in return for this generous dollar?" he asked sarcastically. Without hesitation, Lily answered, "A miracle! I'll give you back the ability to walk." Margaret gasped. Richard's face darkened. "Get out," he said dangerously. "Get this delusional child out of my sight." But Lily didn't move. "You don't believe in miracles because you've never seen one, but that doesn't mean they aren't real. 3 surgeons from 3 different countries have told me I will never walk again," Richard spat. "My spine was crushed beyond repair." "Medicine can't fix everything," Lily interrupted. "Some things need different kinds of healing." Richard stared at her, fury battling with an inexplicable curiosity. "Margaret, give her $1 and escort her out, and call maintenance about that fence." Margaret quickly handed Lily a $1 bill, which she took carefully. "Thank you," Lily said. Then, looking directly at Richard, "I'll be back tomorrow to start your miracle." Before Richard could respond, Lily turned and walked toward the door, her small shoulders straight. "Don't bother coming back," Richard called after her, "and if you do, security will be waiting." The door closed with a soft click. Richard spun his wheelchair around. "Increase security patrols. I want that fence fixed today." "Yes, Mr. Harrington," Margaret said softly. Richard wheeled himself to the window, trying to ignore the strange feeling in his chest, something he hadn't felt in years. Hope. Dangerous, irrational hope. "Ridiculous," he muttered, crushing it down. But as he stared at his perfect, empty garden, he couldn't help wondering if Lily Thompson would indeed return. That evening, Richard found himself unusually restless. He browsed company reports and attempted to read a novel, activities that had failed to engage him since the accident. In his bedroom, he opened the bedside drawer and removed his grandfather's pocket watch. He wound it mechanically, though it had stopped keeping time years ago. He thought of the strange little girl and her absurd promise, a miracle, As if such things existed in a world where a single moment, a blown tire, a guardrail failure, could destroy everything. Security would ensure she wouldn't return. That was for the best. He had no time for childish fantasies. But as Richard drifted towards sleep, Lily's words echoed in his mind. You don't believe in miracles because you've never seen one, but that doesn't mean they aren't real. The sleek black Bentley crawled through the rundown neighborhood. Inside, Detective Jack Reynolds reviewed his tablet while Richard gazed out the tinted windows. This is it? Where Lily Thompson lives? Richard asked, eyeing the dilapidated apartment complex. Yes, sir. Unit 14B. Mother is Sarah Thompson, 32, single parent, works double shifts at Rosie's Diner. No father in the picture. Jack scrolled through his notes. They moved to this building 6 months ago, though they've been in Portland for nearly 2 years. Richard frowned. The building was worse than he'd imagined. Peeling paint, broken concrete steps, a playground with equipment that looked like tetanus waiting to happen. Criminal record? Richard asked. None for the mother. Clean as a whistle. Pays rent on time, despite the financial struggle. The girl, Lily, stellar reports from school. Teachers say she's unusually bright, empathetic. Richard nodded. He'd hired Jack the morning after Lily's unexpected visit, determined to learn everything about the child who'd breached his security. Sir? Jack cleared his throat. May I ask why you're interested in this family? Richard turned away from the window. Just being thorough, Jack. When a child breaks into my home, I want to know who I'm dealing with. Jack nodded, unconvinced. One more thing. Sarah Thompson worked for TechVision briefly, 3 years ago. Customer Service Department. Richard's head snapped up. What? That wasn't in your initial report. Just found it this morning. Short employment, less than 6 months. Terminated during the mass layoffs after your accident. A familiar bitterness rose in Richard's throat. After his car crash, while he was still in the hospital, his partner Ben Cooper had initiated emergency restructuring. 500 employees cut. Drive back, Richard ordered abruptly. I've seen enough. As the Bentley pulled away, Richard caught a glimpse of a small figure in a pink jacket, skipping toward the apartment building. Lily. Back at his mansion, Richard pulled up TechVision's personnel records. Sarah Thompson. Hired January 2022, terminated June 2022. Excellent performance reviews. Reason for termination, company restructuring. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. Mr. Harrington, Margaret said, there's someone at the gate. Security wants to know if they should let her in. Richard knew without asking. The Thompson girl? Margaret nodded. Richard checked his watch. Almost exactly 24 hours since her last visit. Let her in, he said finally. But have security escort her directly to the sunroom and stay within earshot. 15 minutes later, Lily sat across from him, her feet dangling above the floor. Her clothes were cleaner today, her hair neatly braided. You came back, Richard stated flatly. I said I would, Lily replied. I promised to give you a miracle. And I told you miracles don't exist. Lily tilted her head. Have you ever seen the ocean, Mr. Harrington? The non sequitur caught him off guard. Of course I have. What about someone who's never seen the ocean? If they don't believe it exists, does that make them right? Richard's mouth twitched. Clever analogy, but the ocean can be proven. Miracles cannot. I'm going to prove it to you. She reached into her backpack and pulled out a child's drawing. This is for you. Richard reluctantly accepted the paper. It showed a crude drawing of a man standing, not in a wheelchair, beside a lighthouse. What is this supposed to be? It's you. At the place where you proposed to Emma. Richard froze. What did you say? The lighthouse at Cannon Beach, where you asked Emma to marry you 25 years ago. Cold dread washed over Richard. How do you know about that? No one knew about the lighthouse proposal except Emma. It had been their private moment. No photographer, no family present. Lily shrugged. I just know things sometimes. Mom says I have good intuition. Did your mother tell you to say this? Richard demanded. Is this some kind of extortion? Lily looked genuinely confused. What's extortion? Mr. Harrington, is everything all right? Margaret called from outside. Fine, he snapped. Your mother worked for my company. Did you know that? Lily nodded. She answered phone calls from customers. She liked helping people. And she was fired. Is that why you're here? Some kind of revenge? The little girl's eyes widened. No, Mom doesn't even know I come here. She thinks I'm at my friend Madison's house after school. She leaned forward. I'm here because you need help. Richard searched her face for deception, but found only sincerity. You know things, he said finally. Things you shouldn't know. Yes. Prove it. Tell me something else. Something no one could know. Lily thought for a moment. You have a scar on your right knee from when you fell off your bike when you were 11. Your dad got really mad because you ruined your new pants. The hair on Richard's arm stood up. He had that scar, now hidden beneath the blanket covering his useless legs, and his father had indeed berated him about the pants. One more, he whispered. You keep your grandfather's pocket watch in your bedside drawer. You wind it every night, even though it stopped working years ago. Richard's breath caught. No one knew about his nightly ritual with the watch. Who are you? He asked, a tremor in his voice. I'm just Lily, she said simply. Can I come back tomorrow? I'll bring something to help you start walking again. Richard found himself nodding, his mind racing. Good, Lily said, sliding off her chair. See you tomorrow, Mr. Harrington. After she left, Richard sat motionless, the child's drawing clutched in his hand. The lighthouse was unmistakable, the same distinctive structure where he'd once knelt before Emma. He picked up his phone and dialed a number he hadn't called in years. Emma, it's Richard. We need to talk. I don't understand what you're asking me, Richard. Emma's voice came through the speaker. Whether I've spoken to a child about our engagement? Of course not. Richard gripped his wheelchair. Emma had refused to meet in person, but he needed answers. This girl knew about the lighthouse, Emma. She drew a picture of it. A pause. And you think I told some random child about one of the few private moments of our marriage? Someone told her. She knew other things too, personal things. Such as, Richard hesitated, my childhood, the pocket watch. Richard, Emma's voice softened. You've been isolated in that mansion for 3 years. Is it possible you're overreacting? The suggestion stung because it carried truth. Since the accident, his world had shrunk to the walls of his mansion, his only contacts being Margaret, his physical therapist, and occasionally Ben, when company matters required his signature. The girl's mother worked for Tech Vision, he said. Sarah Thompson, do you remember her? How would I? I wasn't involved in the company for years before our divorce. Emma sighed. Richard, what's this really about? You don't call me for 3 years, and suddenly you're fixated on some child who knows about a lighthouse. How could he explain that for the first time since waking up in the hospital to learn he would never walk again, he felt something other than bitter resignation? She said she can make me walk again, he said quietly. The silence that followed was heavy. Oh, Richard, Emma finally responded, her voice mixing pity and exasperation. You know that's not possible. The specialists were very clear. I know what they said, he snapped, then immediately regretted it. I know, but this girl, she knows things, Emma. Have you spoken to Dr. Mitchell about this? I'm not delusional, if that's what you're implying. I'm not implying anything. I'm concerned. This doesn't sound like you. The Richard I knew was ruthlessly logical. The Richard you knew could walk. Another long silence. What do you want from me, Richard? Emma asked finally. Information. Has anyone been asking about me? About us? No, no one. Emma paused. Does this child want money? Richard thought of Lily's simple request for $1 to buy bread. No, at least not beyond $1 for food. $1? Emma laughed, but it wasn't unkind. Well, that's refreshing at least. Listen, I have a meeting. I suggest you talk to Dr. Mitchell about this interest you've developed. After hanging up, Richard sat in silence, staring at Lily's drawing. The lighthouse looked just as he remembered it, tall, white, with the distinctive red top. His phone buzzed with a text from Ben Cooper. Board meeting next week. Your proxy vote needed. Documents being sent. Richard ignored it. In the 3 years since the accident, he'd allowed Ben to run TechVision with minimal interference. The company had been his life's work, but now it felt as distant as walking. On impulse, Richard opened the drawer containing his grandfather's pocket watch. How had Lily known? The watch had been in the drawer since before his accident. His computer chimed with an incoming email, the board documents from Ben. Richard opened the files automatically. Quarterly projections, acquisition proposals, executive compensation packages. He stopped, scrolling back. Ben was proposing another round of strategic workforce reductions, while simultaneously increasing executive bonuses by 25%. This despite TechVision posting record profits. For the first time in years, Richard felt a stirring of his old business instincts. This wasn't just standard corporate greed. Something felt off about these numbers. He began reading more carefully, noting discrepancies, questionable allocations. For 3 hours, he lost himself in financial statements, his analytical mind engaging in a way it hadn't since before the crash. When Margaret reminded him about dinner, Richard realized he'd skipped lunch, too absorbed in his investigation. "Margaret," he said, "when the Thompson girl comes tomorrow, I'd like you to drive her home afterward. I want to know where she lives, who she talks to." Margaret looked uncomfortable. "Sir, is that appropriate? I'm not asking you to follow her secretly. Just drive her home. Observe. I want to understand who's behind this." "Behind what, sir?" "This. Whatever this is, someone must be feeding her information." Margaret's expression shifted to concern. "Mr. Harrington, have you considered that this might just be a neighborhood child who's heard stories about you?" "She knew about a private moment between my ex-wife and me that happened 25 years ago," Richard interrupted sharply. "She knew about a childhood injury and a family heirloom I keep in a locked drawer. That's not imagination, Margaret. That's something else." After she left, Richard returned to the financial documents, but his concentration had fractured. His thoughts kept returning to Lily Thompson and her impossible knowledge. Richard wheeled himself to the window, looking out at his vast, empty grounds. Somewhere beyond his property walls was a dilapidated apartment building where a little girl and her struggling mother lived. A girl who'd asked for just $1, and in return offered the impossible. For the first time in years, Richard Harrington found himself wondering, what if? Lily didn't come the next day, or the day after. By the third day, Richard found himself checking the security cameras with increasing frequency, irritated by the disappointment he felt each time they showed nothing but his empty driveway. "Perhaps she's lost interest," Margaret suggested gently. "Children often do." Richard grunted noncommittally, not wanting to admit how much Lily's absence bothered him. On the fourth day, as Richard was reviewing more of TechVision's financial records, he'd found several troubling discrepancies. Margaret appeared at his study door with an unusually serious expression. "Mr. Harrington, there's a woman at the gate insisting on seeing you, Sarah Thompson. She says it's about her daughter." Richard's heart rate quickened. "Let her in." 10 minutes later, Sarah Thompson stood before him in his living room. She was younger than Richard had expected, early 30s at most, with the same blonde hair as her daughter, though hers was pulled back in a practical ponytail. She wore a waitress uniform with Rosie's Diner embroidered on the pocket. "Mr. Harrington," she began without preamble, "I need to know why my daughter has been coming to your house." Richard studied her carefully. "I was about to ask you the same question, Ms. Thompson. Your daughter appeared unannounced on my doorstep 5 days ago, asking for $1. Sarah closed her eyes briefly. "I was afraid of this. Mr. Harrington, I'm so sorry for any inconvenience Lily has caused. She's not like other children." "I noticed," Richard said dryly. "She seems to know things she shouldn't. Personal details about my life." Sarah's posture stiffened. "What are you implying?" "I'm not implying anything. I'm stating a fact. Your daughter knew about private moments from my past that no one could have told her. I want to know how." Sarah sank onto the edge of a chair, looking tired. "Mr. Harrington, I don't know how Lily knows the things she knows. She's always been different, perceptive in ways I can't explain, but I assure you, I haven't been feeding her information about you." "You worked for my company," Richard said, wheeling closer. 3 years ago. Yes, customer service. I was laid off during the restructuring after your accident. Did you know who I was then?" "Of course, everyone at TechVision knew who Richard Harrington was." A hint of bitterness crept into her voice. "Though I doubt you knew who any of us were." Richard couldn't argue with that. "Where has Lily been these past few days?" he asked. Sarah's expression clouded. "She's sick, a fever that won't break. The doctor says it's just a virus, but—" She trailed off, visibly worried. "But?" Richard prompted. Sarah met his gaze directly. "She keeps talking about you. In her fever. Saying she needs to help you, that she promised you a miracle." A chill ran through Richard. "Ms. Thompson, I never asked your daughter for anything. She came to me." "I know. That's why I'm here." Sarah leaned forward. "Mr. Harrington, Lily is a special child. She sees things, knows things that sometimes even I can't explain. But she's never been fixated on someone like this before." "What does she want from me?" Sarah shook her head. "It's not about what she wants from you. In Lily's mind, it's about what you need from her." "And what's that?" "Healing," Sarah said simply. "Not just physical. She thinks your soul is in pain." Richard barked a laugh. "My soul? I didn't realize your daughter was also a theologian." Sarah didn't rise to the bait. "Lily believes everyone deserves kindness, even billionaires in wheelchairs who think they're beyond help." The statement, delivered without malice but with unflinching directness, left Richard momentarily speechless. "Ms. Thompson, please call me Sarah." "Sarah," Richard amended, "I appreciate your concern for your daughter. But I assure you, I'm not in need of spiritual guidance from a 6-year-old. She's very stubborn," Sarah said with a small smile. "Gets that from me, I'm afraid, once she sets her mind to something." "Like breaking into secured estates?" Sarah winced. "I've spoken to her about that. She won't be trespassing again." Richard found himself unexpectedly disappointed. "She's really that ill?" "The fever comes and goes. The doctor isn't concerned yet, but—" Sarah hesitated. "She keeps asking for you, says she needs to give you something important." Richard was surprised by his own response. "I could visit her, if you think it might help." Sarah's eyebrows rose in obvious surprise. "You would do that? Visit a sick child in our— Well, our apartment isn't exactly up to your standards, Mr. Harrington." "Richard," he corrected automatically. "And yes, I would. Your daughter has. Intrigued me." Sarah studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "All right. But not today. She's finally sleeping. Perhaps tomorrow. I have the afternoon shift, but I could meet you at our apartment around 10 a.m. "I'll be there," Richard said. "Margaret can drive me." After providing her address, Sarah stood to leave, then paused. "Richard, there's something you should know about our apartment building." "What's that?" "It was built by a subsidiary of TechVision Developments 8 years ago." Richard frowned. "That's not possible. TechVision never had a real estate division." "Not officially. It was called Horizon Living, a pilot project in affordable housing that was abandoned after negative press about substandard materials. Sarah's voice was carefully neutral. Just thought you should know, since you'll be visiting tomorrow. Richard, you're not thinking clearly. Ben Cooper's voice had an edge to it. He stood by the window in Richard's study, afternoon sunlight casting his shadow across the floor. These accusations are completely unfounded. Richard kept his expression neutral. The stone from Cannon Beach sat in his pocket, a reminder of his promise to Lily. They're not accusations, Ben. They're questions. Questions about discrepancies I've found in Tech Vision's financial records. Ben turned, his tailored suit unable to hide his tension. Discrepancies. You've been out of the loop for 3 years. What might look like discrepancies to you are simply new operating procedures. New procedures that funnel company funds through shell corporations? Richard raised an eyebrow. Entities that, coincidentally, you have controlling interest in. A flicker of something, surprise, fear, crossed Ben's face before his businessman's mask slipped back into place. That's absurd and offensive. Is it? Richard wheeled himself to his desk and picked up a blue folder, the exact color Lily had mentioned. Because the documents you want me to sign today would give you unilateral control over Tech Vision's acquisition strategy, including the ability to sell off divisions without board approval. Ben's laugh was forced. It's a standard efficiency measure. The board has already preliminarily approved it. We just need your signature as majority shareholder. Funny thing about being stuck in a wheelchair, Richard said conversationally. People assume your brain is as damaged as your legs. They think you're not paying attention, that you don't care anymore. No one thinks that. You thought that, Ben. Richard's voice hardened. You counted on it. On my isolation, my depression after the accident. You've been systematically looting my company for 3 years, thinking I was too broken to notice. Ben's professional demeanor cracked slightly. This is paranoia, Richard. Maybe you should talk to Dr. Mitchell about adjusting your medication. I spoke with Emma yesterday, Richard continued. She reminded me of something interesting. You were supposed to join us the weekend of my accident. Last-minute business kept you away. What are you implying? Ben's voice had dropped dangerously low. I'm not implying anything. I'm wondering why the brake lines on my car failed on a vehicle that had just been serviced the week before. I'm wondering why you were so quick to restructure the company while I was still in intensive care. I'm wondering why Sarah Thompson, who filed an internal complaint about irregular financial practices, was among the first employees terminated. Ben's face had gone pale. You're connecting dots that don't exist, Richard. Maybe. Richard tossed the blue folder onto his desk. Or maybe I'm finally seeing clearly for the first time in years. Either way, I won't be signing these documents, and tomorrow I'll be attending the board meeting in person. You can't be serious. Ben's composure was fully shattered now. Richard, you haven't left this house except for medical appointments in 3 years. The board will see this as a mental health episode. Perhaps, Richard acknowledged, or perhaps they'll be interested in the audit I've commissioned from an independent firm. An audit focusing specifically on the financial irregularities I've identified. Ben's expression shifted from shock to calculation. Richard, let's not be hasty. Whatever concerns you have, we can address them privately. There's every need, Richard said firmly. Tech Vision was built on innovation and integrity. Somewhere along the way, I lost sight of that. It's time to course correct. Ben studied him for a long moment. This isn't like you, Richard. The Richard I know is pragmatic, not idealistic. What's changed? What, indeed? Richard thought of Lily Thompson, of her strange insights and her simple certainty. Let's just say I've gained some perspective, he said finally. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have preparations to make for tomorrow's meeting. Ben straightened his tie, visibly regrouping. Think carefully about this, Richard. You've been out of the game a long time. Business is different now. The board respects what you built, but they've grown accustomed to my leadership. I'm sure they have, Richard agreed pleasantly. We'll see if that holds when they learn about Horizon Living and the other projects you've buried. Ben's eyes narrowed. Careful, Richard. You don't want to make an enemy of me. Too late, Richard replied, meeting his gaze steadily. I think we've been enemies for some time. I just didn't realize it until now. After Ben left, his departure marked by the squeal of expensive tires, Richard sat in silence, processing the confrontation. Ben's reaction had confirmed his suspicions. The question now was how deep the corruption went, and whether Richard had enough evidence to convince the board. His phone buzzed with a text from Sarah Thompson. Lily's fever is back. She's asking for you. Richard felt an immediate concern that surprised him with its intensity. I'll come right away, he texted back, then called for Margaret to prepare the car. During the drive, Richard found himself clutching the stone from Cannon Beach, drawing comfort from its smooth surface. In just a few days, Lily had somehow become important to him, this strange, insightful child who saw through his carefully constructed walls. Sarah met him at the door, worry etched in her face. Thank you for coming so quickly. The doctor says it's nothing serious, but her fever keeps spiking. Richard followed her to Lily's room, where the little girl lay curled on her side, her cheeks flushed with fever. She stirred when Richard wheeled himself to her bedside. Mr. Harrington, she murmured, her voice weak but her eyes brightening. You didn't sign the papers. No, I didn't, he confirmed, again struck by her inexplicable knowledge. How are you feeling, Lily? Tired. She struggled to sit up and Sarah gently helped her. But I need to tell you something important. Lily, you should rest, Sarah admonished gently. After, Lily insisted, her gaze fixed on Richard. Mr. Harrington, you need to go to the lighthouse. Richard blinked in surprise. Cannon Beach? Why? Because that's where you'll find your miracle. Lily's voice was earnest despite her weakness. Promise me you'll go. The boardroom fell silent as Richard wheeled himself in, every eye fixed on him with varying degrees of surprise. He hadn't entered this room in 3 years, but now he navigated to the head of the table with quiet confidence. Richard, Ben recovered first, his smile not reaching his eyes. We weren't expecting you in person. Clearly, Richard replied dryly, noting the empty space where a chair should have been. I trust someone can find a place for me. There was an awkward shuffle as staff rearranged the seating. Richard observed the board members, some familiar faces, some new appointments since his withdrawal from active management. While we're getting settled, Richard continued, I've added an agenda item, a review of certain financial practices that have come to my attention. Ben's smile froze. I'm not sure what you're referring to, Richard, but any concerns should be addressed privately before bringing them to the full board. I disagree, Richard said pleasantly. These matters directly affect TechVision's integrity and future. The board should be fully informed. As the meeting progressed through routine matters, Richard watched Ben carefully. His former friend maintained his composure, but Richard caught the subtle signs of stress, the too frequent sip of water, the slight tightening around his eyes. Finally, they reached Richard's added agenda item. Over the past week, Richard began, I've conducted a preliminary review of TechVision's operations during my absence from active management. What I've found concerns me deeply. He tapped his tablet, and financial charts appeared on the screen. These figures show systematic diversion of company resources through shell corporations, entities ultimately controlled by individuals in this room. A murmur ran through the board members. Ben leaned forward. Richard, these are serious allegations without context. Perhaps you're misinterpreting. I'm not finished, Richard cut him off firmly. Beyond financial irregularities, I've uncovered evidence of ethical breaches that expose Tech Vision to significant liability. The Horizon Living project is just one example. He switched to photos of the Thompson apartment building, highlighting structural issues and code violations. This is what happens when we prioritize profit over people. When we forget the values that built this company. That project was terminated years ago, Ben interjected. Ancient history. Not to the families still living in dangerous conditions, Richard countered. And not to the courts when they learned Tech Vision knew about these issues and did nothing. For the next 30 minutes, Richard methodically presented his findings. Some board members looked shocked. Others, Richard noted, seemed unsurprised, perhaps complicit. In conclusion, Richard said finally, I'm calling for a full independent audit of Tech Vision's operations over the past 3 years. During this process, I'll be resuming active leadership as CEO. Ben stood abruptly. This is absurd. Richard has been completely disconnected from the business for years. His understanding of modern market realities is outdated at best, delusional at worst. My understanding of ethical business practices hasn't changed, Ben, Richard replied evenly. Neither has my majority shareholding in this company. A tense silence followed as board members exchanged glances, calculating where their interests lay. Richard waited, outwardly calm, though his heart raced. Elaine Johnston, the longest-serving board member, cleared her throat. I move that we approve Mr. Harrington's proposal for an independent audit, effective immediately. Several voices seconded the motion. Ben looked around the table, his expression darkening as he realized he was losing control of the situation. This isn't over, Richard, he said quietly, as the board voted overwhelmingly to approve the audit. You have no idea what you're doing. Actually, Richard replied, for the first time in years, I know exactly what I'm doing. By the time his driver returned him to his mansion, Richard felt drained in a way he hadn't experienced since his rehabilitation days. Margaret met him at the door. You look exhausted, Mr. Harrington. Shall I prepare your medication? No, Richard decided. Just some tea, please. And I'd like to know if there's any message from Sarah Thompson about Lily's condition. Ms. Thompson called an hour ago, Margaret confirmed. Lily's fever has broken again. The doctor says it's a persistent virus, but nothing to be alarmed about. Relief washed over Richard. Good. That's good. His phone buzzed with an incoming call, a number he didn't recognize. Richard Harrington, he answered. Mr. Harrington, this is Dr. Reynolds from Pacific Children's Hospital. A woman's voice, professional but urgent. I'm calling about Lily Thompson. Richard's grip tightened on his phone. What's happened? Ms. Thompson gave us your number as an emergency contact. Lily's been admitted with a high fever and concerning symptoms. We're running tests now, but I wanted to inform you as requested. I'll be right there, Richard said immediately. Where exactly is she? After getting the details, Richard called for his driver again. The drive to the hospital seemed interminable, his mind racing with possibilities, each worse than the last. At the hospital, he found Sarah pacing outside a room, her face drawn with worry. Richard, she said, relief evident in her voice. Thank you for coming. What happened? He asked, wheeling closer. Sarah ran a hand through her disheveled hair. The fever came back worse than before. She was delirious, talking about you and the lighthouse. When she started having trouble breathing, I brought her to the emergency room. What are the doctors saying? They don't know yet. They're running blood tests, checking for infections. Sarah's voice cracked slightly. They mentioned they're testing for some rare conditions too, autoimmune disorders, environmental toxins. Richard felt a chill at the mention of toxins, remembering the evidence he'd uncovered about Tech Vision's cost-cutting measures, the substandard materials used in projects like Horizon Living. Can I see her? He asked. Sarah nodded, leading him to where Lily lay in a hospital bed that seemed far too large for her small frame. Monitors beeped steadily, an IV line running into her arm. Despite her pallor, her eyes brightened when she saw Richard. "You came," she whispered. "Of course I did," Richard said, wheeling to her bedside. "Your mother says you're not feeling well." Lily's smile was weak but determined. "It's okay. This is part of it." "Part of what?" Richard asked gently. "The miracle." Lily's voice was matter-of-fact despite her condition. "Sometimes things have to get worse before they get better." Richard exchanged a worried glance with Sarah. "Lily, you should focus on getting well. Don't worry about miracles or lighthouses." Lily shook her head slightly. "You still don't understand, but you will on Sunday." Her eyes drifted closed. "You promised to go." "I will," Richard assured her, surprised by how much he meant it. "I promised. As Lily dozed off, Richard quietly ordered environmental testing for the Thompson apartment building. If he was responsible for Lily's illness, he needed to know, and he needed to fix it. "I'll take care of everything," he promised Sarah. For the first time since his accident, Richard was looking forward to tomorrow. Not dreading it, not enduring it, actively anticipating it. Perhaps that in itself was the beginning of a miracle. Sunday dawned clear, the kind of perfect Oregon day that seemed almost deliberately orchestrated. Richard sat in the passenger seat of Sarah's modest sedan, watching the coastline emerge as they rounded the final bend toward Cannon Beach. "We're almost there," Sarah said, glancing at him. "How are you feeling?" "Ridiculous," Richard admitted. "A 58-year-old man chasing a child's fantasy." Sarah smiled. That 58-year-old man also upended his entire company and faced down his corrupt partner because of that same child's insight. Richard couldn't argue. The past 48 hours had been a whirlwind. Emergency board meetings, press statements about the leadership transition, and preliminary findings from the environmental testing confirming dangerous levels of industrial chemicals in the Thompson apartment building. "Any update on Lily's condition?" he asked. "Stable," Sarah replied. "The new medication seems to be helping. The doctors are cautiously optimistic." They fell silent as the iconic Haystack Rock came into view, standing sentinel over the beach. "There's the lighthouse." Sarah pointed to the white structure perched on the headland. "I remember," Richard said softly. 25 years ago, he'd climbed those steps with Emma, a ring burning a hole in his pocket, his future seemingly limitless. "How do you want to do this?" Sarah asked as she parked. "The lighthouse isn't exactly wheelchair accessible." "I came prepared," Richard said, pointing to the all-terrain wheelchair he'd had delivered overnight. "It's designed for beach access." Sarah helped him transfer into the specialized chair. "Lily said you had to go alone. I'll wait here." The beach was relatively quiet, just a few families scattered along its expanse. Richard's wheelchair moved surprisingly well over the packed sand near the water's edge, allowing him to make steady progress toward the lighthouse trail. As he approached the base of the headland, Richard realized the true challenge lay ahead. The path included steps his chair couldn't navigate. "Need a hand?" A voice startled him. A man in his 30s stood nearby. "Saw you looking up at the lighthouse. There's actually a service road around back. I work there. I could show you." Richard hesitated, then remembered Lily's certainty. That would be very helpful. The man, Tom, led Richard to a concealed service road that wound gently up the headland. The gradient was manageable in Richard's chair, though it required effort. "You picked a perfect day," Tom commented. "The view is spectacular." Richard barely heard him, focused on the physical exertion, the first real challenge he'd embraced since his accident. Sweat beaded on his forehead, his arms burning with the effort. But with each push, something shifted inside him, a reminder that while his legs might be useless, the rest of him wasn't. They reached the lighthouse plateau, and Richard paused, breathing hard, but with a sense of accomplishment. "I'll give you some space," Tom said, sensing Richard's need for solitude. Alone now, Richard wheeled himself to the railing overlooking the ocean. The view was indeed spectacular, endless blue stretching to the horizon, sunlight dancing on the waves. This was where he'd asked Emma to marry him, where he'd once been truly happy, full of ambition and love and dreams that seemed boundless. "I'm here, Lily," he whispered to the wind. "Now what?" Only the cry of seagulls answered him. Richard wasn't sure what he'd expected, a sign, a revelation, perhaps even the promised miracle. Instead, there was just the sun, the sea, and his own reflection. But as the minutes passed, something subtle shifted. The tightness in his chest loosened. The bitterness that had been his constant companion for 3 years seemed to dissolve in the salt air. For the first time since his accident, Richard felt peace. Not resignation, not the numbness he'd mistaken for acceptance, but genuine peace. He sat there for over an hour, watching the rhythm of the waves, remembering not just the man he'd been when he proposed to Emma, but the boy who'd dreamed of building things that mattered. His phone buzzed. A text from Sarah. "Everything okay?" "Yes," he typed back. "Coming down now." As he navigated back down the service road, Richard felt lighter somehow. The miracle Lily had promised hadn't materialized, but he wasn't disappointed. The hospital corridor seemed longer than Richard remembered, his wheelchair moving with purpose toward Lily's room. The stone from Cannon Beach sat in his pocket, a tangible reminder of his experience at the lighthouse. Sarah had gone ahead while Richard spoke with Dr. Reynolds about additional specialists. As he approached the room, he heard urgent voices and quickened his pace. 2 nurses rushed past him into Lily's room. Richard's heart clenched as he caught sight of Sarah's pale face, her hand pressed against the glass observation window. "What's happening?" he demanded, wheeling to her side. Her fever spiked suddenly. Sarah's voice trembled. "They're trying to bring it down." Through the window, Richard could see medical staff surrounding Lily's small form, attaching new monitors, administering medication. "Mr. Harrington." Dr. Reynolds emerged from the room, her expression grave. "Lily's condition has deteriorated. The toxins in her system are affecting her liver function now." "What does she need?" Richard asked immediately. "We're stabilizing her, but she requires specialized treatment. There's a pediatric toxicology unit in Baltimore that has experience with these specific compounds." "Make the arrangements," Richard interrupted. "Whatever it costs. My plane can be ready within hours." Dr. Reynolds nodded. "I'll coordinate with their team." Inside the room, the immediate crisis appeared to be resolving. The nurses stepped back, one adjusting Lily's IV while another documented vitals. Sarah turned to Richard, conflict evident in her eyes. "I can't accept—" "Yes, you can," Richard said firmly. "This isn't charity, Sarah. It's responsibility. My company created this situation. The testing isn't conclusive yet. I don't need more tests to know what's right," Richard insisted. "Please, let me do this." Sarah studied him for a long moment before nodding slowly. "Thank you." They were allowed into the room once Lily was stabilized. She looked frighteningly small against the hospital sheets, her normally vibrant presence diminished by illness. Her eyes fluttered open as Richard approached. "You went to the lighthouse," she whispered. "I did," Richard confirmed, taking her small hand in his. "Just as I promised." A smile ghosted across Lily's pale face. "Did you find it?" "I find what?" "Your miracle." Richard hesitated, then placed the stone from Cannon Beach beside her pillow. "I found this, and I found clarity." Lily's smile widened slightly. "That's part of it." "Part of what?" "The healing," Lily murmured, her eyes drifting closed again. "Not done yet." Sarah stroked her daughter's hair. "Rest now, sweetheart. You're going on a trip to see some special doctors." As Lily dozed off, Richard's phone buzzed. A message from his assistant. Urgent news regarding Ben Cooper. Call immediately. Richard excused himself to the hallway. His assistant's voice was tight with controlled excitement when he called. Sir, the forensic accountants found something in Ben's personal communications, evidence that he may have been directly involved in your accident. Richard's breath caught. What kind of evidence? Emails to a mechanic sent the week before your crash. They reference adjustments to your car that would solve the leadership problem. The accountants found them while investigating financial records. Ben paid this mechanic from a shell company account. Cold realization washed over Richard. He tried to kill me. It appears so, sir. The FBI has been notified. They're seeking a warrant now. Richard ended the call, his mind racing. The pieces fell into place with terrible clarity. Ben's absence the weekend of the accident, his immediate restructuring of the company, his systematic dismantling of everything Richard had built. He wheeled himself back to Lily's room, working to compose his expression. This wasn't the time to burden Sarah with this revelation. "Everything all right?" Sarah asked, noting his distraction. "Just company matters," Richard replied. "The arrangements for Baltimore are underway. My plane will be ready by evening." The Tech Vision headquarters lobby fell silent as Richard wheeled himself through the main entrance for the first time in 3 years. Employees froze. Conversations halted mid-sentence, all eyes following his deliberate progress toward the elevators. The past 48 hours had been a whirlwind. Ben Cooper had been arrested, charged with financial crimes and attempted murder. The evidence recovered from his communications and financial records was damning. Not just the tampered brake lines on Richard's car, but years of systematic fraud and corruption. The elevator doors opened onto the executive floor. Richard's former, now current again, assistant Claire gasped when she saw him. "Mr. Harrington!" "We weren't expecting you until the afternoon meeting." "Plans change, Claire," Richard said, a hint of his old decisiveness returning. "Please call the executive team to the main conference room, immediately." Within 30 minutes, Tech Vision's leadership team sat around the conference table, a mixture of apprehension and curiosity on their faces. Some were familiar to Richard, others had been appointed during his absence. "For those I haven't met," Richard began, "I'm Richard Harrington. 3 years ago, I founded this company with a vision of technology that improves lives. Somewhere along the way, under Ben Cooper's leadership, that vision was corrupted." He wheeled himself to the head of the table. "As of today, we're course-correcting, dramatically." For the next hour, Richard outlined his plan, a complete overhaul of Tech Vision's corporate structure and ethical guidelines. Increased transparency, accountability at every level, and most urgently, a comprehensive remediation program for all those harmed by the company's negligence. "The Horizon Living developments will be our first priority," Richard concluded. "Every resident will be relocated to safe housing at our expense, while the buildings are either renovated or demolished and rebuilt." "The cost would be astronomical," protested the CFO, a Cooper appointee named Daniels. "Shareholders will revolt." "Let them," Richard said firmly. "I still hold controlling interest, and I'd rather rebuild this company right than continue profiting from harm." He could see the shock on their faces. This wasn't the Richard Harrington they remembered, the ruthless businessman who prioritized growth above all else. "For those uncomfortable with this new direction," Richard continued, "severance packages are available. For those who stay, I expect full commitment to our new mission." By day's end, 3 executives had resigned. Richard viewed this as progress. In his newly reclaimed office, Richard connected via video call to Sarah in Baltimore. Lily had been admitted to the specialized unit, already undergoing advanced treatment protocols. "How is she?" Richard asked, studying Sarah's tired face on the screen. "Stable," Sarah replied. "The doctors here are amazing. They've seen these toxin combinations before. Apparently there was a similar case involving materials from another development company. Richard nodded grimly. Unfortunately, Tech Vision wasn't the only corporation cutting corners, but we may have been the worst. The lead physician wants to talk with your environmental testing team, Sarah said. Something about treatment protocols, being specific to the exact chemical compounds. I'll arrange it immediately, Richard promised. Sarah, I want you to know that I'm doing everything possible to make this right. Not just for Lily, but for everyone affected. Sarah's expression softened. I believe you. The Richard Harrington that Lily saw from the beginning, he's really there, isn't he? Richard considered this. Perhaps he always was, just buried under ambition and then bitterness. Well, I'm glad he's resurfaced, Sarah said with a small smile. Lily will be too when she's more alert. After ending the call, Richard wheeled himself to the window overlooking the city. 3 years ago, from a similar window, he'd surveyed his domain with pride and ambition. Now, he saw it differently, not as an empire, but as a responsibility. The Baltimore hospital was a maze of corridors and specialized units, but Richard navigated it with determination, a bouquet of sunflowers balanced on his lap. After a week of intensive work restructuring Tech Vision and cooperating with federal investigators on Ben's case, he'd finally managed to fly east. He found Sarah in the family lounge outside the pediatric toxicology unit, her face lighting up with surprise when she saw him. Richard, we weren't expecting you until tomorrow. I caught an earlier flight, he explained, suddenly self-conscious about the flowers. These are for Lily, if they're allowed, Sarah smiled. They're perfect. She's having a good day. The doctors are cautiously optimistic about her latest test results. She led him to Lily's room, a cheerful space despite the medical equipment. Lily was sitting up in bed, coloring in a book. She looked up as they entered, her face breaking into a wide smile that transformed her from patient to simply a happy child. Mr. Harrington, you came. Of course I did, Richard said, wheeling himself to her bedside. And please call me Richard. Lily considered this, head tilted. Okay, Richard. Did you bring me something? Sarah started to admonish her, but Richard laughed. As a matter of fact, I did. He presented the sunflowers, which Lily accepted with delight. They're like little suns, she declared. Mom, can we put them where I can see them from my bed? As Sarah arranged the flowers in a vase, Richard studied Lily. Her color was better than when he'd last seen her, though she still looked fragile against the hospital bedding. How are you feeling? He asked. Better, Lily said confidently. The doctors here know exactly what medicines I need, and they're helping other kids from our building too. Richard nodded. Yes, we've arranged for everyone from Horizon Living Developments to receive proper medical screening and treatment. That's part of your miracle, Lily said matter-of-factly, helping people instead of hurting them. The simple observation struck Richard deeply. I suppose it is. Have you been walking yet? Lily asked suddenly. Sarah looked mortified. Lily, that's not an appropriate question. But Richard wasn't offended. No, Lily, my spine is still damaged. That hasn't changed. Lily frowned slightly. But you went to the lighthouse. You found the stone. I did, Richard confirmed, pulling the Cannon Beach pebble from his pocket. And I found perspective, peace perhaps, but not the ability to walk. Lily shook her head, undeterred. You're not listening properly. The miracle isn't finished yet. Before Richard could respond, a doctor entered. Dr. Patel, the specialist overseeing Lily's treatment. After introductions, she shared encouraging news about Lily's progress. The targeted treatment is working well. The toxins are clearing from her system more rapidly than we anticipated. If this continues, we might be looking at discharge within 2 weeks. That's wonderful, Sarah said, visible relief washing over her. Indeed, Dr. Patel agreed. though we'll need to ensure she doesn't return to the contaminated environment. That's been taken care of, Richard assured her. All residents are being permanently relocated. The buildings will be demolished. Indeed, after the doctor left, Sarah excused herself to make some calls, leaving Richard alone with Lily. "I brought you something else," Richard said, reaching into his briefcase. He withdrew a folder containing architectural renderings. "I wanted your opinion on these. The board is waiting, Mr. Harrington." Claire's voice brought Richard back to the present moment. He nodded, straightening his tie before wheeling himself into the boardroom. The faces that greeted him were a mixture of Tech Vision veterans and new appointees, a carefully balanced team Richard had assembled over the past month. "Thank you all for being here," he began. "Today marks a significant milestone in Tech Vision's recovery and renewal." The projector displayed the comprehensive plan they'd developed, the Horizon Remediation Initiative. Not just replacing contaminated buildings, but creating sustainable communities with integrated healthcare facilities, educational resources, and green technology. The total investment will be $2.7 billion over 5 years, Richard concluded. A significant commitment, but one that reflects our responsibility to those harmed and our vision for the future. Barbara Chen, the new CFO, nodded. "The financial models show we can sustain this investment while maintaining core operations. It will impact shareholder returns in the short term, but enhance our reputation and stability long term. More importantly," Richard added, "it's the right thing to do." The vote was unanimous. As the meeting concluded, Richard felt a sense of accomplishment unlike any he'd experienced in his business career. This wasn't about profit or market dominance. It was about healing, making amends. His phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. "Great news! Doctors have cleared Lily for discharge tomorrow." Richard smiled, sending back his congratulations. Over the past month, he'd traveled to Baltimore every weekend, watching Lily grow stronger, her vibrant personality re-emerging as the toxins left her system. And with each visit, his connection with Sarah had deepened, dinners extending into long conversations, shared concerns evolving into shared hopes. "Claire," he called as he returned to his office, "please clear my schedule for the next few days. I need to fly to Baltimore tomorrow." "Already done, sir," she replied with a knowing smile. "The jet is on standby for a morning departure." That evening, as Richard prepared for his trip, his home phone rang, a rare occurrence, as few people had that number. "Richard Harrington," he answered. "Mr. Harrington, this is Dr. Mitchell." The voice of his longtime neurologist was instantly recognizable. "I've been reviewing the new imaging from your latest exam, and something unusual has appeared." Richard tensed. "Unusual how?" "There's activity in the damaged areas of your spine that wasn't present before. Minimal, but definite." "What does that mean?" Richard asked, his heart suddenly racing. "I'm not entirely sure," Dr. Mitchell admitted. "It could be an anomaly in the imaging, but if it's not, there might be regeneration occurring." Richard gripped the phone tighter. "Are you saying I might walk again?" "I'm saying it's worth exploring further," the doctor emphasized. "I'd like to consult with some colleagues at Mayo Clinic. There's experimental work being done that might be applicable to your case." After arranging to meet with Dr. Mitchell upon his return from Baltimore, Richard sat in silence, processing this unexpected development. Was this what Lily had meant? Was this the miracle she'd promised? The next day, Richard arrived at the Baltimore hospital just as Lily was completing her discharge process. She squealed with delight when she saw him, actually running, to greet him with a hug. "Richard, you came for my going-away party." "I wouldn't miss it," he assured her, amazed at her transformation from the frail child he'd first visited. Sarah approached more sedately, but her smile was equally warm. "This is a wonderful surprise. We weren't expecting you until later." I wanted to be here for the big moment, Richard explained, presenting Lily with a small gift bag, a going-home present. Inside was a snow globe containing a miniature lighthouse, Cannon Beach captured in glass and water. Lily's eyes widened with delight. "It's the miracle place," she exclaimed, shaking it to create a flurry of white particles. "Look, Mom, it's even got tiny stones on the beach." The Oregon coast gleamed under a perfect summer sky. Cannon Beach stretching out below the lighthouse plateau where Richard sat in his wheelchair. The specialized beach chair had become a familiar companion over the past 6 months, enabling him to access places he'd once thought lost to him forever. "Ready?" Dr. Patel asked, standing beside him with Sarah. Richard nodded, taking a deep breath. The experimental therapy had shown promising results, not a full restoration of function, but significant improvement. Today would be the first test outside the controlled environment of the rehabilitation center. "Lily, would you bring the walking frame, please?" Sarah called. Lily, now 7 and completely recovered from her illness, proudly carried the lightweight support frame to Richard's side. "Here you go." "Thank you," Richard said, smiling at her barely contained excitement. She'd been insisting for months that this day would come, that the lighthouse was where the miracle would be completed. With Sarah and Dr. Patel positioning themselves on either side, Richard carefully transferred from the wheelchair to a standing position, gripping the frame for support. His legs trembled with the effort, but held. "Well done," Dr. Patel encouraged. "Remember, small steps. There's no rush." Richard focused on the techniques he'd practiced for countless hours, shifting weight, engaging the partially regenerated neural pathways, using the frame for balance rather than full support. His right foot moved forward, then his left. Shaky, uncertain steps, but steps nonetheless. Lily clapped her hands in delight. "You're doing it! You're walking!" Richard managed 3 more steps before needing to rest, lowering himself onto a bench Sarah had positioned nearby. The exertion left him breathing hard but exhilarated. "That was excellent," Dr. Patel said, checking his vitals. "Better than I expected for the first outdoor attempt." Sarah squeezed his shoulder, her eyes bright with emotion. "How does it feel?" "Exhausting," Richard admitted with a laugh, "but incredible." Lily stood before him, her expression serious despite the joy in her eyes. "See, I told you there would be a miracle." "You did," Richard acknowledged, "though I don't think either of us expected it quite like this." The experimental treatment had been discovered through a serendipitous connection. Dr. Mitchell's colleague at Mayo Clinic had been collaborating with a researcher funded by Tech Vision's new Medical Innovation Division. The therapy combined electrical stimulation with a novel regenerative approach, targeting Richard's specific type of spinal injury. He would never regain full function. The damage had been too severe, the intervention too delayed. But the ability to stand, to take limited steps with support, to feel sensation in his previously numb legs, these were outcomes no specialist had thought possible 3 years post-injury. "Let's try once more," Richard suggested after resting, to the railing. This time, Lily positioned herself before him, walking backward as he advanced with the frame. "Just follow me," she instructed solemnly, "like I followed you that first day." Richard laughed at the memory. This confident child had indeed simply walked into his life and changed everything. Later, as they prepared to leave, Richard found himself alone with Lily for a moment while Sarah packed their picnic. "Lily," he said quietly, "there's something I've wanted to ask you for a long time. How did you know? About the lighthouse, about Ben, about everything?" Lily considered the question with unusual seriousness. "I just know things sometimes, especially when people need help." "And you knew I needed help?" She nodded. "Your picture was in Mom's old work stuff. You looked so sad, even though you were smiling. And then I had a dream about the lighthouse, and you were there, but different, happy. Richard marveled at the simplicity of her explanation, part intuition, part childlike certainty, perhaps something more that defied rational understanding. "Well, thank you," he said finally, "for seeing what I needed, even when I didn't." Lily beamed at him. That's what family does. Family. The word resonated deeply. From isolated recluse to part of this small, extraordinary family in just 6 months. As they drove back to Portland, Richard seated beside Sarah while Lily dozed in the back. He thought about the journey ahead, the ring in his pocket, waiting for the right moment. None of it would have happened without a child's belief in miracles, and her willingness to offer one in exchange